My name is Celine. The title of this post is something I have whispered to myself for over a decade, but never dared to type out. People worry about your mental health when you talk about ghosts. They worry even more when you tell them you are living with one. But I'm 36 now. I'm established, I'm stable, and I'm far enough away from the event to look at it clearly. I need to get this down, because I looked at her this morning, really looked at her, and I realized the truth is undeniable. To understand what I have now, you have to understand what I lost. It started 15 years ago. I was 21, living in a cramped, drafty apartment in Montreal with the love of my life, Marianne. We were young, stupidly in love, and perpetually broke. Marianne was everything I wasn't. I was quiet, anxious, and prone to overthinking. Marianne was a firecracker. She was loud. She laughed with her whole chest, and she had the most piercing, impossible blue eyes I have ever seen on a human being. She was my anchor, until the night I let her drive away angry. The argument was stupid. It's the cliché of every tragedy, isn't it? We fought over money. We were short on rent, and she had spent a little extra on concert tickets for my birthday. I should have been grateful. Instead, I yelled. I told her she was irresponsible. I told her she didn't take our future seriously. The last words I said to her were, "Just get out. I can't look at you right now." So she did. She grabbed her keys, her eyes swimming with tears that made that blue look like a stormy ocean, and she slammed the door. 2 hours later, the police were knocking. Black ice on the highway. She had lost control of our beat-up Honda and went over the guardrail. She died on impact. The weeks following the funeral are a blur of gray. I don't remember eating. I don't remember sleeping, really. I just remember laying in our bed, staring at the empty spot beside me, smelling the fading scent of her vanilla shampoo on the pillowcase. The guilt was a physical weight. It sat on my chest like an anvil. I had killed her. I convinced myself of that. If I hadn't yelled, if I hadn't kicked her out, she would be safe in bed. I was a murderer. That was when the activity started. At first, I welcomed it. It began small. I would come home from my waitressing job to find things displaced. A picture frame turned face down. The cabinet doors in the kitchen wide open. The temperature in the apartment would plummet, leaving my breath visible in the air despite the radiator clanking away at full blast. My grieving mind didn't register fear. It registered hope. "Marianne," I would whisper into the darkness. "Is that you?" I assumed she was back. I assumed she wanted to tell me she was okay. But the atmosphere in the apartment wasn't comforting. It was heavy. It felt oppressive, like the air pressure before a tornado. 3 weeks after the funeral, the activity shifted from passive to aggressive. I was in the kitchen making tea. I had the kettle on the stove. Suddenly, the burner dial snapped from low to high on its own. The gas flared up with a whoosh. I jumped back, my heart hammering. I reached out to turn it off, and a mug from the drying rack flew off the counter. It didn't just fall, it was thrown. It shattered against the wall inches from my head. I stood there, shards of ceramic at my feet, trembling. "Marianne," I cried out, tears streaming down my face. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I thought it was her anger. I thought she was trapped here, furious at me for the way we left things. I deserved it, I told myself. If she wanted to throw things, let her. I deserved every bit of it. But it got worse. The nights became unbearable. I would wake up at 3 a.m. to the sound of heavy, wet breathing right next to my ear. Not the soft breath of a sleeping partner, but a raspy, guttural sound. When I reached for the lamp, the bulb would pop with a deafening crack, plunging me back into darkness. Shadows began to pool in the corners of the room, taller and darker than they should have been. They seemed to stretch toward the bed. I stopped sleeping. I became a ghost of myself, dark circles under my eyes, shaking through my shifts at work. The culmination happened on a Tuesday in November. It was a month after the accident. I was lying in bed, fully dressed, because I was too terrified to change into pajamas anymore. I was staring at the ceiling, waiting for the sun to rise. The silence in the apartment was deafening. Then, the temperature dropped. It wasn't gradual, it was instant. The air went freezing cold, so sharp it hurt my nose to inhale. I squeezed my eyes shut. "I'm sorry, Marianne," I whispered my mantra of guilt. Something grabbed my ankles. It wasn't a gentle touch. It was a vice grip, strong and painful, like two bands of steel clamping down on my bones. I gasped, my eyes flying open. I tried to kick, but my legs wouldn't move. With a violent jerk, I was ripped down the mattress. I screamed. I clawed at the sheets, desperate for purchase. But the fabric just bunched in my hands. I was dragged off the foot of the bed, my hips slamming hard onto the hardwood floor. The grip didn't let go. I was being pulled across the floor of the bedroom, toward the open closet door. The closet was a gaping maw of darkness. "Marianne, stop, please," I shrieked. I grabbed the leg of the heavy oak dresser as I slid past. The friction burned my palms, but I held on. The force pulling my legs was immense, threatening to dislocate my hips. I was sobbing, hysterical, kicking wildly with my feet against empty air. Suddenly, the grip vanished. I didn't wait. I scrambled up, scrambled into the corner of the room, and curled into a ball, hyperventilating. I stayed there until dawn broke, watching the closet, waiting for her to come back and finish me. I looked at my ankles in the morning light. There were bruises, distinct finger-shaped bruises, but they weren't the size of Marianne's hands. Marianne had small, delicate hands. These marks were large. The fingers were too long. A cold realization settled in my gut. That wasn't Marianne. Marianne had a temper, yes. She could be fiery, but she was never cruel. She would never hurt me physically. She loved me. Even in our worst moments, she loved me. Whatever was in my apartment, whatever was dragging me toward the dark, wasn't the woman I loved. It was something else. Something that fed on misery. And I was an all-you-can-eat buffet. I was terrified to go back to the apartment, but I had nowhere else to go. I spent the day walking around the city, freezing in the November wind, dreading the sunset. That evening, as I approached the front steps of my building, I saw something sitting near the communal trash cans. It was a cat. It wasn't scrounging for food, and it wasn't fleeing from the noise of the street. It was sitting perfectly still, its tail wrapped neatly around its paws, watching me. It was a calico, mostly white with patches of orange and black. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs. The cat stood up and let out a soft MRP sound. It walked right up to me, winding through my legs, rubbing its cheek against my shins. I reached down automatically to pet it. The fur was soft, surprisingly clean for a stray. Then, the cat looked up at me. The breath caught in my throat. The eyes, they were blue. Not the greenish-yellow or amber typical of cats. They were a deep, striking, impossible electric blue. They were her eyes. I fell to my knees on the sidewalk, ignoring the cold concrete. I stared at the cat, and the cat stared back with an intelligence that felt jarring. It bumped its forehead against my nose, purring, a sound like a small engine. "Hey," I whispered, my voice trembling. The cat didn't run away. When I stood up and unlocked the front door of the building, the cat trotted inside ahead of me, as if it owned the place. I hesitated, then followed. It climbed the 3 flights of stairs to my apartment door and sat there, waiting for me to turn the key. I opened the door. Usually, the dread would hit me the moment I crossed the threshold. The heavy, malicious atmosphere. The cat walked in first. It strutted into the center of the living room, sat down, and let out a long, low hiss. It wasn't hissing at me. It was staring at the dark hallway leading to the bedroom. The fur along its spine stood up in a rigid ridge. I stood by the door, paralyzed. The cat held its ground. It let out a growl that sounded too deep for its small body. Then it strode forward, into the hallway, into the bedroom. I heard a thump, like something heavy falling, and then silence. The cat came trotting back out a moment later, its tail held high, looking relaxed. It walked over to the couch, Marianne's favorite spot, jumped up, curled into a ball, and went to sleep. For the first time in a month, the apartment felt empty, but in a good way. The heavy pressure was gone. I didn't kick the cat out. I named her Marianne. It felt sacrilegious to anyone else, I'm sure, but it felt like the only option to me. Things changed after Marianne the cat moved in. The supernatural activity didn't stop immediately, but it changed. It felt like a war was being waged, but I was no longer the soldier. I was the civilian being protected. One night, I was watching TV. The air grew cold again. The familiar scent of ozone and rot began to creep in. I tensed up, clutching a pillow. Mary Ann, who had been dozing on my lap, instantly woke up. She leaped off the couch and stood in the center of the room. She stared at an empty corner near the ceiling, her ears pinned back flat against her skull. She let out a scream, that specific, yowling caterwaul that cats make when they are about to fight. The lights flickered. The TV turned itself off. Mary Ann launched herself at the wall. She literally ran halfway up the drywall, claws out, swiping at the empty air. I saw, and I swear this is true, a dark, misty shape recoil from her. She landed on her feet and hissed again, spitting, her blue eyes blazing. The cold air dissipated instantly. The TV flickered back on. Mary Ann sat down, licked her paw, and looked at me as if to say, "It's handled." This happened a few more times over the next month. Whatever that thing was, whatever dark parasite had latched onto my grief, it was trying to come back. And every time, Mary Ann was there. She was a sentinel. She slept on the pillow next to my head every single night. If I shifted in a nightmare, she would place a paw on my cheek, grounding me. I started to notice things about her behavior, things that made the hairs on my arms stand up. My human girlfriend, Mary Ann, had a very specific hate for olives. If a pizza came with olives, she would pick them off with surgical precision and stack them in a pyramid on a napkin. One night, I ordered supreme pizza. I was eating at the coffee table. The cat jumped up. She sniffed a slice. She delicately used her claw to hook an olive, fling it off the pizza onto the table, and then nudged it away with her nose. She did this to every olive on the slice before trying to steal a piece of the pepperoni. I just stared at her. "Really?" I asked. She blinked slowly. Mary Ann, the human, also had a habit of tapping her fingers when she was impatient. The cat, when waiting for me to fill the food bowl, would tap her left paw rhythmically against the floor tiles. Tap, tap, tap. She didn't like cat toys. I bought feathers, laser pointers, fake mice. She looked at them with disdain. But she loved watching reality TV. She would sit on the back of the couch, eyes glued to the screen, head moving back and forth as the people argued. Human Mary Ann used to say it was her trashy, guilty pleasure. Slowly, the fear in my life evaporated. The dark entity gave up. It couldn't get past the guard dog, or rather, the guard cat. By the time spring arrived, the apartment was just an apartment again. But I was never alone. I talked to her. I know that's what crazy cat ladies do, but this was different. I told her about my day. I told her I was sorry about the fight. I told her I loved her. Whenever I apologized for the accident, for the argument, she would butt her head against my mouth to silence me. She would purr so loudly it rattled her ribs. It was forgiveness. I knew it. Life went on. I moved out of that apartment 2 years later. Mary Ann came with me, obviously. I went back to school. I got a degree. I started a career in graphic design. I dated a few people, though it never really worked out. It's hard to bring someone home when you feel like your dead ex is judging them from the top of the cat tree. And that brings us to today. I was sitting on my porch this morning, drinking coffee. Mary Ann was sunning herself on the railing. I realized the date, October 14th. It has been exactly 15 years since the accident. It has been 15 years minus 3 weeks since I found the cat. I looked at her. 15 years is a long time for a cat. A cat at 15 is usually slowing down. They have gray hairs around their muzzle. Their eyes get cloudy with cataracts. They sleep 20 hours a day. They have trouble jumping onto high surfaces. Mary Ann looks exactly the same as the day I found her. I mean exactly. Her fur is pristine, silky and vibrant. There's not a single white hair on her black and orange patches. Her eyes are that same crystal, piercing electric blue, clear as a summer sky. She jumped from the porch railing to the roof of the garage this morning, a 6-foot vertical leap, to chase a squirrel. She moves with the agility of a kitten. She eats with the appetite of a lion. I took her to the vet last week for a checkup. The vet, a new guy, looked at her chart. Born roughly 15 years ago, he asked, raising an eyebrow. Yes, I said. I found her then. He examined her. He checked her teeth, her heart, her joints. He looked perplexed. He took an x-ray just to check for arthritis. This is bizarre, he told me, showing me the scan. Her bone density, her teeth. If he didn't tell me she was 15, I'd say this cat is maybe 2 years old. Maximum. There's zero sign of aging. Absolutely none. I nodded. I wasn't surprised. I came home and looked at old photos. I found a picture of human Marianne from her 20th birthday. She's laughing, looking at the camera. The look in her eyes is defiance and joy mixed together. Then I looked at the cat, sitting on my desk, watching me write this. I don't think she's a cat. I mean, she is a cat, biologically, I suppose. But the spirit inside, the thing looking out through those blue eyes, the entity that attacked me 15 years ago wanted to hurt me. It was drawn to my guilt. But Marianne, she fought it off. She came back. She found a vessel that would let her stay. I've read about this kind of thing. Reincarnation, possession, spiritual attachment. Usually, spirits move on. They fade. Or if they stay in an animal, the animal eventually ages and dies. But she isn't aging. She isn't leaving. I stroked her head a few minutes ago, running my thumb over her ears. I whispered, "You're not going anywhere, are you?" She let out a short, sharp meow. It sounded like no. She bit my thumb gently, another thing human Marianne used to do when she was being playful, and began to lick my hand with her sandpaper tongue. I'm not scared. I should be, probably. It defies every law of nature. I'm living with a creature that is effectively immortal, inhabited by my dead girlfriend who refuses to cross over because she thinks I can't handle myself alone. And the honest truth, she's probably right. She's looking at me right now. She wants me to stop typing. She's tapping her left paw on the desk. Tap, tap, tap. I guess I better go. She hates to be ignored. It was a calm afternoon in autumn. I was walking along the river towards the nursing home near the edge of the city. I always had night shifts on Mondays, but I didn't mind. I actually liked my job quite a lot. The residents were very nice, and I really felt like I was having a positive impact on their lives. Whenever I didn't have to care for a resident, I played board games and talked with the people living here. They loved the company of me and my co-workers. I arrived at the front door and showed my ID to Jim, our security guard. "Wonderful sunset today," I cheerfully greeted him. He answered with a warm smile and held the door open for me. Upon entering, I put my coat in a locker and headed for the staff conference room, where the day shift always gave the night shift important information about the day. Most of the time, the most important information was the weather forecast for the morning. This time it was different. Diana, a colleague working part-time while attending university, told me that Miss Strauss had trouble sleeping last night because she heard footsteps outside on the corridor all night. This was probably due to a pipe leak in a nearby bathroom. The water dripping on the floor could almost be mistaken for footsteps. After chatting a bit, the day shift started leaving. I was left with 2 other night shift colleagues. Normally, we would be 5, but the others had called in sick, so we had to work a bit harder tonight. After doing a routine check on all residents, I headed for the dining room along with most others. I talked to a group of old ladies about the latest celebrity gossip, as well as Mr. Garcia, who proudly presented me with the scarf he had crocheted over the last couple of days. It was always very nice chatting with these wonderful people. I saw Miss Strauss in the corner of the room and sat down next to her. She looked exhausted and a bit frightened. I tried to start a conversation to distract her, but she stayed silent. After sitting there for a minute, she started talking. Her hand was twitching. She insisted that she heard footsteps the night before. Erratic footsteps running across the hallway and back, multiple times every hour. I tried to calm her down and even offered to stay with her this night, but she declined and went silent again. Disheartened, I went back to the other residents for the rest of the evening. After most residents went to sleep, I sat down in the lounge to read. Even though we were understaffed, there was surprisingly little to do tonight. I managed to read about 40 pages before I heard something. distant sounds, irregular, moving on the floor above me like someone stomped with heavy hiking shoes. The sounds were moving quite fast, and were gone in only a few moments. I didn't think much of it and continued reading. Thud, there it was again. I placed my book on the table next to me and started walking towards the staircase. Upon reaching the first floor, I peeked into the hallway. Nothing. I slowly walked along the doors. I was almost at the end of the hallway when I noticed a slightly open door. It was dark inside. Goosebumps started appearing on my arms. When I turned on the light, I saw Mr. Garcia lying on the bed, unnaturally pale. A shiver went down my back, and I quickly looked over my shoulder. But I was alone. I was walking up to his bed when I noticed his neck. He had a nasty, round hole in his neck, with an outline that resembled an unnaturally large bite mark. I put my shaking hand over my mouth and pressed the emergency button, which alerted my colleagues. I tried to feel the pulse of his fragile arm, but there was none. Not just a missing pulse, but no blood. His veins felt flat and empty, and his entire body lacked any color, like he was sucked dry. But the worst thing was his stomach. Something had ripped big chunks of flesh out of the side of his belly, and parts of his intestines were falling out. Luckily, no residents woke up during the night, so we gave an announcement in the morning that Mr. Garcia had unfortunately passed away in his sleep. We didn't want to cause concern, but we knew. Something killed him. During breakfast, Miss Strauss told me that she heard the erratic footsteps again, running towards Mr. Garcia's room. I comforted her again, but deep down, I started to believe her. The sight of his lifeless body had burned itself into my brain and haunted me for the entire day. Even when I went home, I returned the next night with a cold sweat on my body. The evening went normally, but when the residents went to their rooms, I was scared. I felt watched constantly. Suddenly, a red light came on in the lounge, signaling that a resident had pressed the emergency button. It came from Miss Strauss. I ran upstairs and threw the door open, finding her sitting on the ground. Under my bed," she stuttered. "I found it when I dropped my glasses." I slowly lied down to look underneath her bed. I gagged. Under the bed was a human hand, severed by what seemed like brute force. I crawled back from the bed shivering. Moments later, my colleagues, who also saw the emergency light, arrived. They were just as shocked and confused as I was. We did not immediately find out who the hand belonged to, but one resident, Mr. Taylor, was missing entirely and nowhere to be found. After this incident, stories quickly spread throughout the nursing home, and some residents temporarily moved to their families. The other two night shift colleagues quit, but I stayed. I did not feel comfortable with leaving the rest of the residents alone. They were relying on the staff taking care of them. Especially Miss Strauss seemed more distressed than ever, and I constantly had to calm her down. She told me that she even started hearing the footsteps during the day now. Soon, I started looking behind my back nervously every minute, always expecting something charging at me in the hallways. I was scared of empty rooms, mirrors, corners where I could not see the other side. During the night, I also started hearing the footsteps more regularly, often accompanied by creaking doors, as if something was looking for the remaining residents. Then, at 4 a.m., I needed to bring a resident his medicine. I went up to the first floor when I heard the footsteps again, followed by the creaking wood of a door. I looked around the corner. A scream tore through the silence of the night. It came from Miss Strauss. I burst through the door. Miss Strauss looked like she would have a heart attack any second. Her right arm was covered in blood. I quickly looked around, but I only saw an empty room, but an open window. I sat down on the bed and asked her to breathe with me to calm down. After 10 minutes, I asked her to tell me what happened. She described a pale, hairless creature with unnaturally thin and long limbs sneaking through her door with blood dripping out of its mouth. The creature had climbed on the ceiling over her bed, while the blood dripped down on her arm. Just when it tensed up to jump at her neck, it suddenly crawled towards the window when I came towards her room. I was very relieved that the blood on her arm wasn't hers, but I soon realized that it must have come from somewhere. Someone. I frantically checked every room until I found the source. Jeff, our security guard. was lying inside the broom closet of the first floor. His pale arms were pointing away from his body in unnatural angles. His mouth was wide open in a silent scream. I slowly walked backwards. It was too much. I wanted to get out of there. Even if there are still other residents left, the day shift would take care of them. I ran towards the exit, pushing an emergency door open. I heard the buzzing of the door alarm, but I ignored it. I ran across the grass of the courtyard towards the street when a wave of guilt hit me. I was thinking about Miss Strauss. I would leave her alone if I ran away. I stopped and looked back towards her window on the left side of the building. I saw her standing at the window, blood dripping from her mouth with an unnaturally wide smile. I should have listened when the innkeeper handed us the key. She pressed the wooden tag into my palm and didn't let go for a second too long. Her dark eyes flicked toward the ocean, and she said, "Don't go to the beach at night." My husband, Mark, laughed softly. "Why? Are the tides too rough?" She stared at us without a single word. She looked like she was about to say something, but instead turned away. On the porch behind her, a group of women watched us and whispered amongst themselves. "They're probably superstitious," Mark whispered when we carried our bags upstairs. "Old island legends." But as we walked through town that afternoon, I noticed something was wrong. I saw women sitting on crates, sewing clothing. Women were out sweeping their porches and running errands. When we got to the restaurant, a woman came and took our order. When I went to the bathroom, on my way back I caught a glance of the kitchen as the door closed. There were only women cooking there. When I got back to the table, I nudged Mark lightly and said, "I haven't seen any men here. Isn't that weird?" He squinted. "I think you're overthinking it. Maybe, maybe not. We plan to watch the sunset and then head straight back." I repeated the innkeeper's warning in my head. "Don't go to the beach at night." I almost said it out loud when Mark packed the wine, but he looked so happy that I swallowed it and followed him to the beach. Mark put down a nice quilt on the ground, and we sat down as he poured the wine. The sky melted into a warm orange ribbon. Mark clinked his plastic cup against mine and grinned. I laughed and touched his cup. The waves sighed against the shore. The air smelled like salt and something sweet. For a moment it was just us, and the world felt held together by warm light. But then the sun slipped under the horizon, and the temperature dropped sharply. Fog pooled at the shoreline and began drifting toward us. It was thin at first, just a pale sheet rolling over the sand. Then it wrapped around us and thickened until I could barely see Mark. I rubbed my arms. "It's freezing. We should head back." Mark leaned back into the sand, closing his eyes. "Just a few more minutes. We just got cozy." My breath showed white in the air. Something instinctive kicked in. My heart started pounding. This felt like a bad omen. "Mark, we should go." "Seriously." Before he could answer, a sound drifted through the fog. A song that rose from the ocean with the grace of a goddess. I froze. The melody wasn't like anything else I had ever heard. My throat tightened and a tear slid down my cheek. Mark didn't speak. He didn't even blink. "Mark," I whispered, "do you hear that?" He didn't answer. His eyes were set straight into the fog. It reflected in them like silver. "Mark, look at me." I shook his arm gently. He stood. I grabbed his wrist. "Hey, what are you doing?" He didn't look at me. He stepped forward, slow and steady, toward the shoreline hidden under the fog. "Stop." My voice cracked. "Stop. Come back here." He kept walking. The voice in the fog swelled, its notes trembling with warmth, pulling Mark deeper into its embrace. "Mark, stop. Please stop." He walked into the shallow water. The waves curled around his feet. I lunged and grabbed his arm with both hands. "You can't go in there. Do you hear me?" He spoke for the first time since the singing began. His voice sounded thin, like it came from far away. "She's flawless." My stomach dropped. "Who?" "Mark, who?" His eyes were wide open. He stared into the fog with a wide grin. I followed his gaze and saw nothing but shifting white. He stepped deeper. I dug in my heels and pulled with everything I had, but he kept moving. The water climbed his shins, then his knees. My pants soaked instantly. I choked on the cold air. "Mark, please. Please look at me." He didn't. He kept walking. The next wave hit us and knocked me off balance. I clung to him desperately, nails biting into his arm. The water surged around our waists. My teeth chattered. Then he stepped again and dragged us both under. The world vanished in a rush of freezing black. I clamped my mouth shut and kicked upward, fighting the weight of our clothes, of the current of him. My fingers slipped on his arm once, then again. I tried to grab his shirt, but it slid from my grip. A moment later, my hands closed on nothing. My lungs screamed. I forced myself upward and broke through the surface. I gasped violently, coughing seawater, blinking against the fog. "Mark," I choked out. "Mark." I dove again, my arms cutting blindly through the water. Cold scent brushed my fingertips, then nothing. When I surfaced again, the singing had stopped. "Mark." My voice bounced off the fog and died. My entire body shook as I swam back to the shore. I felt the wave slam me into the sand. I collapsed onto my hands and knees. The fog slowly thinned, and the only sound was the restless tide. I wrapped my arms around myself and stared into the sea. I sat there for a long time, whispering his name until my voice broke. I was alone on that dark shore, watching the waves that had swallowed my husband whole. We were only 2 hours from town when the storm hit us, as if it had been waiting for the perfect moment. What started as a few droplets quickly turned into a full cloud burst. I heard Damien yell, "Look, there's a cabin." It was a small, half-collapsed wooden house in the middle of the forest. A single muddy footprint on the porch, fresh even though the rain had just started. Damien knocked on the door, and on the second knock, the door opened on its own with a loud screech. A cold breeze followed. We all looked at each other. Damien shrugged his shoulders and walked in. "I bet it's abandoned. Worst case, the owner shows up, and we get yelled at for dripping all over their floor." Damien said, laughing, "I'd take yelling over being out in that storm." Steve replied, walking in too. I was hesitant to walk behind them. Then lightning struck nearby, and I quickly rushed in. The cabin was small, split into 2 rooms. There was a lot of dust around, but besides that, the place was clean. Mugs and plates stacked neatly on shelves. A closet full of old clothing. There were beds in both rooms, made up like someone just left them that way today. A jar of black liquid was on one of the shelves. Damien took it off and opened it. The smell was foul. I had to plug my nose. "I'll give you $5 if you drink this," he said to Steve, who rolled his eyes. "Maybe don't open jars with unknown liquids, Damien," Steve replied. Some strange bugs crawled on the floor. I'm not sure I've ever seen this kind before. They were the same dark black as the liquid in the jar, with 8 legs and small wings. Long antennas twitched around as they crawled on the floor. Their eyes were unnaturally white, following your every move. The bugs would scatter into different crevices between the floorboards. Looking at them gave me a strange feeling of eeriness and unpleasantness, like I could feel their small black bodies crawling under my skin. Steve found a fireplace in the back of one of the rooms, with some old wood around it. He got the fire going while Damien just sat on the bed eating his food. "Can you ever help?" Steve asked angrily. "You seem to have it under control," Damien replied, laughing. Steve shook his head and turned back. They took the room with a fireplace. I don't get cold, so I didn't mind taking the other room. Before falling asleep, I could hear the 2 laughing. It was funny how quickly they would calm down after getting on each other's nerves. I woke up in the middle of the night to some strange sounds. It took me a second to realize it was Damien speaking in a concerned voice. When I walked to the next room, I saw Steve lying on the bed, spasming, holding his stomach, letting out faint gasps of pain. Damien was sitting next to him now, almost yelling, "Steve, Steve, what's wrong with you? Talk to me." I knew something was seriously wrong. Steve never showed his pain. What happened to him? I said. Damien looked my way quickly, almost as if woken up from a trance. "I don't know, man." I woke up to Steven making these weird, choking wet sounds. "We need to call for help." I didn't even finish my thought. Steven fell to the ground. He He was now on all fours, heaving like a cat. I tried to pull my phone out of my pocket, but my hand were trembling. Stephen then started throwing up a strange black fluid on the ground, hardly visible under the dim light. The fluid started moving, slithering, inching on the ground. The room didn't smell of stomach acid, but of a strange, sour, slightly sweet but unpleasant smell. The fluid was making tiny clicking, rustling sounds. The movement intensified, and I could feel the wooden floor moving. I didn't realize it at first, but Damien yelled out in panic, "It's fucking bugs." It was almost as if his scream woke the fluid from its long-forgotten sleep. It was now glowing with that strange white-eye color. The bugs started running around the floor, hiding in tiny crevices between the wood. I jumped up and screamed, trying to step on as many bugs as I could. Before we knew it, the fluid was all gone, and Steve's body was lying on the floor motionless. My legs started to shake. My mind was spinning, and I could feel my head getting lighter. Damien always tried to seem confident, but when I looked at him, his eyes glowed with fear, and his mouth was trembling. Then his eyes flashed with panic. His pupils dilated even more. He got on all fours and started heaving too. I managed to get the phone out of my pocket, but there was no signal. The same black liquid came out of his mouth. In the light of the fire, I could see him crying. The fear behind his eyes turned into pure terror. I don't think I've ever seen Damien cry. The bugs came out of his mouth, moved around on the ground, and scattered, as did the others. My feet were trembling. My heart was pounding hard. I stood over Damien's body. I couldn't believe it. I tried to move Damien, wake him up, but his eyes stared dully into the ceiling. Was I going to be next? I knew I had to act. I ran out into the forest to call for help. I was falling over roots, slipping on the mud. I kept feeling around in my stomach to see if something moved. I finally made it to the meadow and called the ambulance. They said they should be here in an hour. I fell on the grass, crying, shivering in the cold rain. I saw my friends die most painfully and brutally. Edit. I'm starting to hear buzzing in my ears, but can't see any bugs. Something's crawling in my stomach. The ambulance is 30 minutes away.